Hey everyone, this is Marjory, and I am so excited today to have this conversation with Lynette Zang from ITM Trading. And if you've been on the newsletters, you've seen that we've been talking about Lynette and the need to buy gold and silver right now. We are definitely in the early stages, maybe not even early stages, but it's getting very close to financial collapse, and gold and silver is an important part of going through that. Um, but I also, Lynette is an expert in the life cycles of currencies.
Yes.
And I just find that concept so fascinating. But it's true. I mean, here in the Grow Network, we all know, there's spring and there's summer and there's fall and there's winter, and
Exactly.
we're very used to cycles. And of course, civilizations and currencies and almost everything has cycles. So,
Tell
Lynette,
me what doesn't have a cycle.
you're
Tell me
right.
what doesn't, because I
Lynette,
haven't figured out that
yeah,
yet.
welcome to the call. And Lynette has a lot of interesting distinctions about. So, what does it look like when we're in the final stages, and what kind of things can you expect from that governments will do, because they do have patterns of things that they do over and
Oh,
over again.
yes.
Yeah. So, Lynette, why don't you tell me a little bit? Like you'd mentioned it one time on another interview. You've studied thousands of different currencies that have gone through life cycles.
Yes. And I started studying currencies in 1987. And through that, I started recognizing a pattern. And, I can guarantee you I'm at a different point in my life cycle than my 9-year-old grandson is.
Mhm.
So, where we are in, unfortunately, in the life cycle of the US dollar is we are at the end. And the way that you know that we are at the end, number one, it's this rapid inflation. And how everybody refers back to this being like the 70s and the 80s and even back to the 30s. And that's because they reference it, but they never ever say that's when we shifted from a gold standard to a debt standard. We had a monetary regime shift. So if you're our age, if you're my age, because I think I might be older than you, Marjorie, but then you were there in 1971, and even though I was a teenager, I didn't really understand what was happening fully. With hindsight, it's very clear, and the patterns are just repeatable patterns. For example, there is always a war that accompanies a regime shift, because that justifies the inflation and all the money printing, and you're distracted, right? That's what they do. They try and keep things as normal for you as possible, but they also want to distract you so that you're looking over here when they're changing everything over here. Another very interesting pattern is there is always some kind of civil rights, women's movements, things like that. And, we all know that that's happening. And we just had the Roe versus Wade, overturned. And that's not a good thing, taking
Mhm.
away our rights. There's also inflation, fast, rapid inflation, and I think everybody can see that in everything they do, that inflation is not transitory, although I guess transitory is relative. You can say it's been transitory for 100 years.
In geologic time.
Yes,
Transitory.
exactly.
Yeah.
And but you see, the big tool that the central banks were given in 1971, particularly once we went completely off the gold standard, was to regulate the rate and speed of this debt-based system, right? And they do that with interest rates. Well, we've been anchored at zero since 2008. And they tried to raise them in 2016. It was a big fat fail. And they're trying to raise them again, and they'll raise them into a crisis. So again, a big fat fail. But if you have, and so taking into consideration that they lost their biggest tool, the interest rates, well, what's the next piece is the purchasing power. And that's what rapid inflation reveals to the public that otherwise would not be paying too much attention, that we're losing purchasing power very rapidly. Officially, according to the Federal Reserve, there's 3 cents left. And we know that they juggle those numbers to make them look better. So the only thing that's really holding the system together right now is public confidence. And that's what rapid inflation also undermines. So we're at the end, and we're in for some very, very interesting times. And we're already, this isn't something that's in the future. This is something that's unfolding right now.
It is, uh, so my son likes to go to Turkey of all places. He's a paraglider, and they have great paragliding there. It's insane, but inflation there, the official inflation there is 85%. Like,
Yes.
he's really glad to have US dollars, and he trades the US
Oh,
dollars almost immediately before he goes to buy something because things are so changing so rapidly. And so I'm assuming from because we're the global reserve currency, that will come here, but we'll probably be one of the last countries to see that. Is that
it
a
we
fair
we
assessment? Or
we're already seeing it. Although before I answer that, can I just kind of back up, because Turkey, this just came out today. Turkey had the best performing stock market in the world, right? Same thing happened in Venezuela. They had the best 2012-13. They had the best performing stock market in the world because people are trying to get away from that currency, whatever the currency is, right? Except that you can only convert stocks into the currency. So you're not really doing yourself a favor. It's just that you
but
don't realize that this is a better alternative.
they're trying to get their money into any other vehicle other than the capital, that their own cash, their own currency,
Exactly.
basically, and hence why
Exactly.
gold and silver is, I mean, that's historically been a monetary instrument for forever, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Exactly.
yeah.
Thousands of years. So, I mean, it's critically important to look at that. And I'm sorry because I diverted myself.
Can I go back
That's
to? I know you and I are both
please.
all over the place, but so you mentioned, well, like one of the classic signs is a war, and then different movements, women's movements, or different.
Mhm.
Um, uh, do you envision like more war erupting other than the Ukraine Russia thing?
Oh, it already is. I mean, if you look at the conflict between the US and China over Taiwan,
Yeah,
and we kind of poked the bear with that when Nancy Pelosi
when
went
Nancy
over
went
there.
over, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we're seeing some conflict between Turkey and Greece.
Hmm.
So we are actually seeing, and in the Middle East. So we are actually seeing a lot of conflict. And I think that's going to get worse because, again, they've got to hide what they're doing. They've got to justify the inflation. Like, heaven forbid, it certainly wasn't the money printing that the central banks did that created the inflation. Oh, no. It was the war between Russia and Ukraine that
Hmm.
created the inflation.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not saying that didn't add to it, but it's the constant money printing. I mean, it's a debt-based system. And when you create debt, you create money. So you have to constantly create debt in order to create money. And let's face it, it's abused. I mean, interestingly enough, when you think about the new technology, and they're taking us into central bank digital currencies, which is programmable money, which scares the crap out of me, to be honest with you.
Hmm.
But while they're taking us there, it needs to be so bad here for most people that they will accept whatever the government is going to push down their throats. And as you and I have talked about many times, and we know, food becomes the single biggest issue for people during these periods of time.
It's, yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
it's the lever. It is the
It
lever.
is.
Yeah.
It
I
is.
think from my perspective, I mean, it in any war situation, it's often difficult to know who's fighting who and why. I mean, back in the Revolutionary War, the guy with the red jacket, you could shoot him. You knew that, right? Now it's so much more complicated, right? We don't know who and
Right.
why, but there are the signs. And the classic thing that happens in any war is supply chains get broken down.
Mm-hmm.
And we are seeing that globally. We are seeing a global breakdown of all kinds of supply chains,
Yes.
and food will absolutely. Uh, it's we're already seeing it, but it's going to become at crisis proportions, and that is will make the average person absolutely go stampeding and asking yeah, they probably will accept. I don't know.
I hope
That's
not.
gonna be, yeah. I hope not.
I hope there's a revolution and we can keep our head. Because if you think back to what happened in 2008, and then all of a sudden the communities came together and there was Occupy Wall Street, and it was
Mhm.
all over the world, right? The problem was is they didn't really understand what they were fighting for. And so over time, it ended up fizzling out to be, nothing. What was really happening is that's when the system died. People don't realize that because they just put it on the free money, IV drip to
Yeah.
keep things looking like they were functioning. But there has been a massive transfer of wealth since 2008. And what we already have in play, again, this is not something we're waiting for in the future. Things are happening faster and faster, and there are so many black swans that are flying above us, which means which one of those is going to land. And if it's something that you can think of, that's not a black swan.
Yes.
Right? If it's something you can think of, it's not. So when people say, well, what black swan? I don't know. I can't think of it. I haven't thought of it. Nobody else has either. They haven't brought it up. But I guarantee you that there will be a crisis of epic proportions
Coming,
because it,
because we're in a crisis of epic proportions, and they're going to need to distract us. Yeah. So
exactly.
if I can riff off what you said and then bring up
Please.
another point, and one is the way that we can actually be in a position to be able to have a revolution that ends up being for the good versus us all being having
Yes.
further control is to be more self-reliant in
Oh,
terms of food, but
100%.
also in terms of the ability to trade and exchange goods and have real wealth versus imaginary wealth, which is what your organization is about. And I fully applaud that people, you need to grow your own food, but having resources in terms of real wealth, money and silver and gold have been used for thousands and thousands of years, and they will be again. Central banks
Right.
are loading up on it. You should look at that. But
Absolutely.
in order to be able to have the revolution, we have to have many, many people who are prepared, which is a big part of what
Yes.
the Grow Network is about. But can we go back to do you think when we see inflation happening, and then of course the guy who does shadow stats is like, well, real inflation is really 20 or 25%, it may be even higher
Right.
than that, and we know it's going to increase more. Uh,
Yeah.
as it inflates, are you seeing them? Uh, you had talked one time about how government they'll revalue the currency.
Oh, yeah.
So, and
Oh, yeah.
can you explain what that means to people when they say you revalue a currency? Can you explain what that looks like, and how often they do that, or what under what conditions that would
Right.
happen?
Well, and there's different ways. So there's the slower valuation, which happens on a day-to-day basis through inflation.
Hmm.
What you're referring to is the overnight revaluation.
Hmm.
Those come about when the public has lost all confidence in the currency.
Hmm.
And so they lop off zeros. That's what they do. And typically the revaluation is overnight, the currency will lose like 95%, 98% of its value. Now we have seen this recently in India and also in Venezuela. In India, 2016, they just they demonetized 85% of all the money that was out there and came out with a new currency. So but during a currency regime shift, which is what we are in right now, on average, they do it 3 times. So you go to bed at night and maybe you have $1,000 in in your account. When you wake up in the morning, you have $100 in the account or $1 in the
Or dollars.
account,
Yeah.
right? They lop off zeros because things get so expensive. It's really obvious and people revolt. They get upset about it. No doubt. On average, they will do this 3 times. So I can't tell you how many times they will do that. And when they do that, gold soars because it's good money,
Hmm.
right? And it's good money not because I say so, but because it is the only financial asset, according to the Bank for International Settlements, which is the central banker's central bank. It is the only financial asset that runs no counterparty risk. And counterparty risk is you and I make a deal, we are counterparties, and I'm counting on you to hold up your end of the bargain, and I'm trusting that you're going to do that, and you're trusting that I'm going to do that the same. But the counterparty to this is the Federal Reserve and the US government that have intentionally built inflation into the currency for 2 key reasons. One, for the government, is so that they could tax you. You've heard of the inflation tax. They could tax you without having to go through legislation. So you're paying more because they get the new money first when they issue bonds, right? That's what creates new money. They get it first when it has the most value. By the time it trickles down to us, the public, it's a lot less valuable. It buys a lot less. For corporations, they wanted to pay you less. But hey, if you're used to getting $10 and they want to pay you 5, you're not going to go for that. But if they pay you $10 that spends like 5,
You don't
well,
notice it. Yeah. Or
voila.
it's harder to notice. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
look at the income and wealth inequality. That is exactly what that positioned and enabled, and it was intentional.
Two questions on that. And one is, what about coins? Quarters, nickels, dimes.
Oh, so if they're pre 1964,
Mhm.
then they are 90% silver. So I
The
don't
dimes
have
and quarters. Yeah. Yeah.
right. So and roughly, it's not this because remember it's 90%, but it's just easier to think of it this way.
Mhm.
A dime is roughly a tenth of an ounce. A quarter is roughly a quarter of an ounce. A $half is roughly half an ounce, and a silver dollar is roughly an ounce. Okay. I mean, that
Mhm.
was one thing that they did that made a whole lot of sense to
Makes
do,
sense. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it's an easy way to
Would the
think of
other
it.
change that's been issued since then? I mean, pennies are made of copper, and nickel is 25% nickel, what, three-quarters copper. I mean, you know, they can zero out your numbers in your bank account, but would change? How does change actually? How does that often happen in the?
Well,
Yeah,
old change has some level of value, but there's no
because
more
it could.
copper.
Yeah.
Exactly, because there's industrial use. I mean, you've
Mhm.
heard of Dr. Copper, which is an indication of how the global economy is typically doing.
Mhm.
So copper itself, yes, that has industrial use. Silver and gold are used in every single aspect of the global economy. So in the financial system, in jewelry, in medicine, in manufacturing, it's even used in space helmets to coat the visors
The
going through
reflectibility of
space.
silver. Yeah.
Exactly.
And
So I actually think that happens to be gold, but gold and silver both are used across every single aspect of the global economy. That's why they've never gone to zero. That's why when they do the reset that we're talking about, they take this, which has no intrinsic value, and they revalue it against gold that is all intrinsic value. And then you see gold express to it's called fundamental value, which is the true value from of its most important function. I mean, it has lots of functions, right? But in my opinion, and I strongly believe this, that the single most important function of gold is to hold your purchasing power intact. So 6,000 years ago, an ounce of gold would buy a suit of armor. In the early 1900s, a $20 gold coin, which is what this is, it's roughly an ounce of gold, that would buy you a really nice men's suit. Today, at the spot market, which is somewhere around $1,776 or something like that, that would still buy a really nice men's suit. So things can happen in the meantime, especially since Wall Street has turned every asset really into a financial product, right? So
mhm.
when you see the spot market, what do they don't refer to it as the spot market, they refer to it as gold. It's not gold. It's a contract, right? It is not physical gold. And what we're finding, and this happens during every crisis, but this has already begun to happen in actually a pretty pervasive way, is that you can see the spot market go down, but you can see the physical market, the premiums grow, and in the collectible market, then the prices go up as well as the premiums going up. So, we're
Yeah.
seeing a
So
recent breakout. Mhm.
for example, if somebody wants to buy a 1 ounce gold coin, the spot price would be whatever it is now, $1,800,
Mhm.
$1,700. But to actually buy that 1 ounce of gold, normally there's a little bit of a fee put on it because they
Right.
turned it into a coin and they ship it. I mean, there's that. But now some of those premiums are just like there's so much demand for it that
Exactly.
that ounce of gold will cost you $2,500 or even $3,000 or even more depending on the coin, because there
Right.
really is that much demand for it. So and the
Exactly.
spot price is completely what you're saying, and I understand is the spot price is completely manipulated by all these paper contracts and really doesn't have a lot to do with actual demand and supply.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It has, it's a trader's market. And understand that this is another reason why we know we're at the end of the cycle, because everything has really been turned into a financial product. And if the governments and the central bankers have their way, even taking that further, your equity would be turned into a token and
Mm.
held on your phone. And then because it's called nudging. This is not my word. This is their word. It's called perception management. They want to manage how you think so that they can control how you move forward. And so they nudge you. We are a consumer driven economy now, right? 70% of the economy is consumer driven. They want you to spend. So they're nudging you to spend. Well, now if you're holding the equity to your home or whatever equity you're holding, it's on the phone. And hey, I really want that boat or that blouse or that whatever. Well, I got all this equity. Let's just buy it. And before you know it, I hate to say this, but the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab is right. You will own nothing, though I doubt you'll be happy. That's the
Yeah.
second part.
That's their second part. Well,
That's their
to
second
go
part.
back to the inflation and hyper, I mean, that would be such a rude
Yeah.
awakening to wake up and find out that your bank account just got
Oh,
divided by 100 or 1,000. But there's a lot of people waking up right now that thought they had cryptos on their FTX exchange wallet and it's gone,
yeah.
or and now there's this whole crypto
And
toppling going on, and it's basically the
right.
same thing as a bank run.
Oh, yeah. It
So
absolutely is.
it's could I put you on the spot? Do you have any idea of where we are, that like when do we think that the prices will devalue so much that they're going to do a reevaluation? We're talking
In
weeks or months or
cryptos or
years? No, in US dollars. I'm sorry. I
oh, in
just
US dollars?
Yeah.
Well, okay. So, look, we have we have interest rates, right? And
Mhm.
interest rate benchmarks. And they created the LIBOR, London Interbank Offer Rate, back in the 80s. And they've written trillions, like hundreds of trillions. I think there's $610 trillion notional value contracts that are out there that are tied to this interest rate benchmark. Well, this is just a stated rate. So you just have a handful of banks that get together every morning and say, gee, if I was going to lend you money overnight, this is how much I would charge you. And if I were going to borrow money overnight, this is how much I would be willing to pay. Surprisingly, it was discovered that it was being manipulated, and that leaked out to the public in 2012. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. But, that was leaked to the public in 2012. And so then the central banks have scrambled to create new benchmarks, and convert all of these contracts into these new benchmarks, and the deadline on that is June 30th of 2023. Originally, it was
Oh,
2021, but they ran a test in October of 2019 with 80 trillion, and it was a big fat fail. So everything went dead silent for about 3 weeks, and then they announced, well, we're going to postpone it to 2023. As of January, but you see, they were having trouble getting the markets to adopt it. And the reason is because they're different benchmarks, and that reprices all of the contracts when it goes from one benchmark to another benchmark. So even though I can't tell you that it'll be Tuesday morning at 8:35, I don't think they can do it. I don't think they can make this. Never, ever, 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 ever been done in history. We can certainly see the impact of these very smart central bankers and governments for your best interest. Not, I'm being facetious.
yeah.
And so, really, I think there's a crisis, a big crisis that's going to happen before that date, because they're going to have to cover up whatever they can't do it. So if you ask me a date, we're running out of time. We are really,
Very, very
really
soon. Yeah,
running
yeah.
out of time.
Well, even without the LIBOR reset, uh, if we can call it that, we've got Europe is not got anywhere near the energy it has. They're about to have a cold freeze coming in here in the next week, and
Yeah.
what's going to be happening there. All kinds of fertilizer and agricultural production is way, way down, and they're
Yep.
running out of food supplies. Biden has released a huge amount of the strategic reserves prior to the election. Imagine that, which kept gas prices down, but that can't go on much longer. We've got a crisis with diesel. I mean, energy is what makes
Energy's big.
everything happen. So
Mhm.
we even before I wasn't aware of the June LIBOR thing, but even before that, yeah, you're right. And there's definitely there's
Right.
the black swan event is probably a good name for it. There's probably a bunch of other stuff coming along that will upset things dramatically. And so
Yeah.
to shift this to what can you do? I mean, we do. So there's a lot of things that are broken. My God, you brought up more things that are broken that I
Oh.
didn't know about. Like
Oh.
everybody looks
Oh.
at
Is it, you know that marble game, and it's a huge round funnel, and you start out and the marble spins and it goes a long way, and then as it gets closer to dumping into that black hole, it goes faster and faster and faster.
Mhm.
Doesn't it feel like we're very close to dumping into the funnel
It
energetically?
does. It really does, and you're seeing it in the increase in mental health problems in the general population.
Yes.
You're seeing it, yeah, everywhere now. A lot of people
And
more and more on edge. Yeah.
and part of what when I'm looking at everything, and my nickname is Data Gal because if I can't prove it, I don't say it other than to tell you this is my opinion, right? But when you look at what they've done to the food supply over the years, they have really taken out and trained people to eat food that has virtually no nutritional value. And that means that people can't think as clearly. And they actually say if we, degrade the currency and then they're working more, then they can't really pay attention to what we're doing because they're busy, right? So if you dumb down the population, and I have my mantra, which is food, water, energy security, barterability, wealth preservation, community, and shelter, because these are all the things that we need to sustain a reasonable standard of living, especially as we're going through this. I love your
Yeah,
work.
yeah. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and to go back to what we had talked about before, like for us, in order to really be able to, I think there's in this impending collapse, there's
Mhm.
the possibility that we can actually regain. Uh,
Yes.
the banking cabal has had control over a lot for hundreds of years that I've studied history, and the chance to actually break the banking cabal by the collapse of the U.S. dollar, although it's
Oh,
going to be extremely painful,
painful. Mhm.
gives us an opportunity, though, to rebuild the world in a better way, a whole more just way, and a whole fair way. And honestly, the system we had was completely unsustainable. So, it was going to collapse anyway of something, somehow.
Well,
Uh,
it
yeah.
has over 4,800 times, Marjorie, right? I mean, there are well over 4,800 currencies that do not exist anymore because they tried the experiment and it was a big fat fail. So, yes, that's true.
Well,
And
that's a
we have to
great
come
insight because the
together.
only currency that has really maintained through all that is silver and gold.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Huh.
It survived all of that. But I think we all need to be as independent and self-sufficient as possible. I mean, by growing up, I cannot sit here and tell you that I was a gardener, right? I mean, I was conscious of the food that I ate because I was lucky enough to be in a household where my mother was a scratch cook and poor. So we didn't go out we didn't go out to eat. She made our
Being poor is
food.
actually kind of a blessing in a lot of cases. Yeah.
Right. We had a kitchen garden but that was not my thing. I had two sisters that both are master gardeners and they're just phenomenal. However, I am an economist and I've been studying. I've been a banker. I was a stockbroker. And like I said, as a stockbroker, that's when I started studying currencies in 87. And 100%, when you look at these currency life cycles, you realize that the single biggest issue for people is food and then medicine, but it's energy. It's all of these things that you can see that are cracking right now. These systems are cracking, whether they're intentional or non intentional.
That's a whole
I'm
nother conversation, which, yeah. I,
exactly.
I love me a good conspiracy theory, and I've heard almost all of them. So, but the bottom line of regardless of who or what or why is our supply chains are breaking down, things are getting more expensive, our currency is becoming worthless in front of our very eyes, and it's happening at a faster and faster rate.
Hmm.
So I love what you're doing because getting people prepared financially is an important component. We need to do a lot of things, and that's definitely an
We
important
do.
component.
I
Yeah.
converted my property here. I'm in dead central Phoenix. I am in dead central Phoenix. I have a little half acre. I have converted it to a food forest. So I'm easily, I mean, hey, in March and April, et cetera, of 2020, I was just eating what I was producing, and I'm walking around my property going, thank goodness I did this, right? Because I
Yeah.
have chickens and ducks and quails, and I have tilapia and crawfish, as well as fruit and nut trees and all of that. That's not my nature, right? I mean, my
Yeah.
nature is to eat healthy, but that's not my nature. It's because of what's happening to the currency. That's
And you know what?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's not one doubt in my mind. Not one doubt in my mind. Because it's happened so many times. And I
Well,
don't know.
I know you're a, somebody keeps calling me. I got to not have that happen. I hope it's not my team telling me something's wrong with the recording. But I know you're a busy woman. You've got to wrap up here. We've only got a few more minutes left. But I wanted to talk about one tip that is really important there, that this hyperinflation and inflation is actually something that we can use to our advantage. And
100%.
using the gold or silver, there's an incredible story of a guy, and I think his name was Steele, who was in Weimar, Germany, and he became like the wealthiest man
Hmm.
in Germany through. He could see what the German government was doing, printing, 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 and he went out and he borrowed as much money as he possibly could, and he bought all these productive assets, coal mines, trains, whatever, factories and all this stuff, and he borrowed as much money as possible because the mark was losing so much money,
Hmm.
and he had productive assets so he could pay those loans. Basically what started out, like it was $1 million loan. Well, after a while, a beer only cost $1 million.
Right.
So can you maybe talk to people about a strategy for
Oh,
using
100%.
gold and
And
silver to cover your some your
your
mortgage?
debts.
Yeah.
Yes, your debts. And actually I just did a piece on that using Germany and showing you. So, there are a couple strategies and a couple issues around real estate and therefore opportunities.
Hmm.
Number one, um, you know, property taxes. You cannot put that property on your back and move away. So
That's
it's called immovable property, and property taxes go crazy during these periods of time. Now, there's a simple way, just based on history, that can help you make sure that you have the right. For that, I actually like fractional gold,
hmm
which is smaller than an ounce. And here, this is a gold Swiss franc. I don't know
hmm
what availability is because I don't do that anymore. But so there's part of the strategy is making sure that you have the right kind of barterable gold to ensure that you can always pay those property taxes. Because if you don't pay the property tax, even if the property is paid off, you're losing it. And that happened quite a lot during the Depression in the US. The other
yes.
piece, the other piece is the mortgage. You have got to have the ability to pay it off, or like we saw in 2008 for those people that went into those restructured mortgages, really, whose best interests were those in? Because they were not in the individual's best interest. So you want to have the ability to pay that mortgage off like that. And again, there's an easy way to calculate how much gold you need that can, boom, pay that off. Because when they do that overnight reset, right now you have gold down here that's undervalued because a rising gold price is an indication of a failing currency. And they don't want you to realize that. And you have real estate that is overvalued. That's going to flip flop, right? So when they do that revaluation, those overnight revaluations, like in Venezuela, gold went up like 3,500 times overnight, right? So at
Huh?
the same time that they're destroying the fiat money, the gold money explodes. So you end up repaying that mortgage with worthless dollars in this country, but it might only take, instead of taking, 10 ounces or whatever, there's ways to calculate it based on what you own. Instead of it taking 10 of these, it might only take one of these, right? Which is a completely different size. So that's another way. And then finally, you pointed out the leverage. There is so much leverage in this system, right? And so all of these corporations, Zillow, the mortgage corporations, what have you, they have borrowed and borrowed to buy all of this property. Now, they have converted a lot of that into securities that sold them back to you. However, all of that leverage property is highly likely to be coming back on the market and going to Weimar, Germany. That overnight revaluation was a loss on real estate of 84.5%. Yep, I just put the chart up. So this is not hearsay. I'm data gal. You can see the data for yourself on this. But if you're sitting with something that holds its purchasing power, gold, then when that happens, you can convert this into the real estate, income producing real estate. So back then, you could buy an entire city block, buildings and all, in Germany if you had 25 ounces of gold. So
Wow.
there are
Yeah.
lots of opportunities if you're in the right place at the right time with the right asset. Because if you don't have gold and all you have are these stinky pieces of paper that are frankly worthless, then you can't do anything with them.
Great. That's really great. So you can say, well, for every $100,000 of mortgage I have, maybe I should get 10 ounces of gold, which is about
It's
$20,000, or you just get a
right.
it's a
It's something
small amount.
we have. If anybody is interested and they want to call us, we have all of those formulas, and
Oh,
it's
good.
all just based upon historic norms. So you have a conversation with one of our consultants, and they can put everything into a spreadsheet and tell you, okay, this is how much barterable silver you need. I'm personally prepared for 10 years, right? Because I think it's going to take at least that long.
At least, yeah.
But yeah, this is how much barterable silver you need. This is how much barterable gold you need. This is how much growth gold you need. So you just come prepared with your goals. And if you don't know how to create those goals, we can walk you through that too. We'll ask you some questions and then you can figure out what's going to work for you.
Awesome.
This
And
is
I guess,
really, oh,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
And I'll get a link down here for people to be able to click on to be able to set up an appointment with you.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so we'll get that going. That sounds really interesting to, what
Yeah,
a relief, because we are headed into some really, really crazy times, and as many things we can put in place now. It's really an incredible blessing, I think, that they're keeping the price of gold and silver
it
so low,
is.
because
Yeah.
every other asset class is blown all to heck. The real estate market, the
Yeah.
stock market, everything is so overvalued everywhere. But that
Mhm.
gold and silver haven't really even budged much from their 1980 values.
Well, in terms of inflation, gold was fixed at $20 an ounce. That's why these 1 ounce pieces have a face value of $20.
Yeah.
The new stuff, the new American Eagles, the 1 ounce coins have a face value of $50. And that is because the official US price of gold is $42.22. And they have been added to their reserves or removed from their reserves since the 50s, not even a stink of an ounce.
Hmm.
I don't know. What do you think the likelihood of that really is?
Yeah. Yeah. It's yeah. Well, Lynette, thanks so much for joining us. And if anybody does want to have a conversation with Lynette with those formulas and figure out how to set yourself up financially so that you can pay off the mortgage with less money now and be set up and secure
Mm-hmm.
financially, which I feel is as much as having food is important and medicine, absolutely. But
Absolutely.
this is a pretty simple thing that you can do to set yourself up financially.
Mm-hmm.
And you're absolutely right. What you were talking about makes sense, because I remember reading a lot about how much property was available because the government had taken it for taxes. And I always thought, that's how did that happen? I mean, things got so bad people couldn't even pay their taxes. It didn't occur to me. Of course, the government ramped up the taxes.
Right.
But it's probably both. Yeah. And so to be able to
Absolutely.
protect yourself going forward. And yeah, absolutely, we will see some black swan events. And the whole
Oh,
LIBOR rescheduling in June is a whole nother,
and
you know,
who's talking about it?
I've never heard of
It's
that actually
it,
before. And yeah, yeah,
it's like nobody's talking about it,
yeah,
because they don't want you to look over there. And that is such an opaque market anyway. I mean, literally in the quadrillions, but notionally 610 trillion. These numbers are so big, people can't even comprehend how big that is,
I can't
right?
comprehend a billion, honestly. Yeah. Yeah, I really think that a whole bunch of other made, like you were talking about with the black swan, I think there's a whole bunch of other things that are going to happen before then that'll continue to upset everything. But regardless, we need to be prepared, and the reason to be
Absolutely.
prepared is because we need strong, good people to rebuild the thing, and
Exactly.
that's what I know we're both working for. So, any final
Oh.
thoughts?
Well, I really appreciate you a lot and what you do. And I'm very glad that I found you. I wish I found you when I first started
Your
to
first garden,
convert my yard. I
yeah,
just dive in,
go for it.
$100 million tomatoes.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
the sooner that you start, the better off you're going to be. I mean, I know I planted some trees and people would say to me, well, when are you going to get fruit from them? I don't know, maybe 3 years, maybe 5 years, whatever it is. Oh, I don't wanna wait that long. But the reality is the sooner you start, the sooner you're gonna get your fruit. And so whether you're talking about food or you're talking about preserving your wealth, I mean, you better
the,
do that.
the
Better
early
do that.
adopters have the advantage. It's just a general principle. So yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Well, thanks again, Lynette, and I'll have that
Been
link
great.
down in the show description here, and for people to be able to hook up a phone call with you, and
Right?
we'll do another call. Let's do another call in after the beginning of the year because I know we're going to have a lot more questions. I'll keep track of all the questions in the
Oh,
comments below.
definitely.
So
And too, Marjorie, if anybody wants to see my work, I publish every week on our YouTube channel,
oh, that's great.
ITM
Yeah.
Trading, right?
Mhm.
ITMtrading.com. And then you've been on Beyond Gold and Silver because
Mhm.
you have to take a holistic approach to it. So you can see my work and ask questions. We love questions, but put your best interest first, which I know if you're watching Marjorie, you're doing that. So do it in this area too, and you're perfect. You're all set to weather any storm.
Well, thanks, Lynette. Super appreciate you, and we'll talk again soon.
Hope so. Take care.